And I have to say, it's actually quite difficult to treat such a sensitive topic without a level of vulgarity. So if I appear to use certain words, please bear with me. And I'll be careful to be sensitive to the sensibilities of my Ghanaian people throughout. I understand that many people feel, many Ghanaians, as if we're to believe Honorable Sam George, feel an aversion to the idea, the very idea of LGBTQ, and want nothing to do with it. And as Honorable Bell Ribeiro said, in essence, that's their right to not want to engage with anything of the sort. A person has a right to decide who and what they wish to engage with, but an aversion to something, an aversion to a thing, does not automatically make that thing criminal. And that is where we need to make a clear distinction. The fact that something offends your sensibilities does not make that thing criminal automatically. And Honorable Bell raised the question, who are we to judge? So I'd like to, first of all, say, I mean, and I'm talking as a traditional ruler, so most people expect me to come in all guns blazing and firing off as this being against my culture. So I'm going to delve in the culture in a while. But first of all, I find the bill very heavy on populism, or the proposed bill is very heavy on populism and the moral high ground. And it's also, you know, but I also find it's very weak on coherent argument and also a tad lazy, I must say. In its current form, passing the bill could, in the long term, criminalize almost the entire Ghanaian population, including Honorable Sam George and his cheerleaders, and that worries me because I might find that something I say, even by virtue of speaking common sense into this debate, I might become what is classed as an ally, and I may be criminalized. And before I go on, I have to say, Honorable Sam George, it is unfortunate equating LGBTQ to armed robbery is a lazy argument. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make any sense. And I also have to say that prostitution is a contractual sexual interaction, not necessarily a consenting one. It's a contractual sexual interaction. So I'll move on. One of the fundamental rights and principles of any human rights legislation is the right not to be discriminated against. A person's choice, therefore, of how they experience sexual pleasure, and I spoke about vulgarity, so bear with me here, with another consenting individual or consenting adult, with emphasis on consenting, where no harm has been caused to either party or to anyone else, cannot be criminalized. Not unless you wish to argue that the sole purpose of sexual intercourse is procreation. And I have 2 children, and I can assure you that is not the case. The proposed bill fails to separate willful cause of harm to another person or criminality from choice and consent. Even more worrying, the entire bill's proposal is based on what Honorable Sam George considers to be the cultural and religious values of Ghana and her people. Let me focus on the cultural for the moment because I am, in fact, a traditional ruler. On the first page of the proposal bill, an excerpt from the statement from the National House of Chiefs is quoted, which emphatically states, the House wants to state without equivocation that throughout history, nowhere does the Ghanaian culture subscribe to LGBTQ, which is taboo, inhuman, and alien to our society. In God's wisdom, man and woman were created to fulfill the procreation of humans on earth to satisfy God's will. The symbolism for sex and marriage was between man and woman. And as such, the idea of man marrying man and woman marrying woman is an abomination to our tradition and culture as Ghanaians. Now, I am part of that traditional institution, but I can equally say without equivocation that my esteemed fellows, fellow traditional rulers in the National House of Chiefs are completely wrong on this one. In fact, there is ample empirical evidence to support the existence of same-sex marriage, same-sex sexual intercourse in Ghanaian society long before colonialism. And I was equally shocked when I researched and found this to be a fact. Being sensitive to the sensibilities of my people, however, I would refrain from naming the specific tribes where this was not only practiced openly, but accepted as a normal part of everyday life. And if you're curious and you doubt what I'm saying, I would encourage you to read a book called Boy, Wives, and Female Husbands by Stephen O. Murray and Will Roscoe. And there is another one, a study by Hutchinson in 1861, pages 129 and 130, which talks about what used to happen in the 19th century in a very prominent part of prominent tribe in Ghana, which practiced, male sexual relationships. Religion will also use the Bible and Quran as primary sources for their call to criminalize what religion considers actions against the religious morality of the people and the imposition of what they term an alien culture on Ghanaians. So having dispelled the cultural myth surrounding this debate by pointing you to the empirical evidence, I would like to point out that by that very definition, Christianity and Islam are both alien cultures. But here we are, we have, as a people, embraced them wholeheartedly. And we're now using that alien culture to propose the expansion of a law, which is the 1960s Act. Don't forget that act was passed by the colonialists, the British who were with us at the time. We're using an alien culture passed by what we would consider aliens to argue or expand a law to criminalize what we consider to be an alien culture. Now, tell me how that doesn't sound absurd within the context of this debate. So, and also pardon me for being a little confused. If I remember correctly, and I think it has been mentioned, people like Hitler used religion and, I suppose, offense to moral sensibilities as a basis to murder 17 million human beings. And those human beings included Black people, pygmies, as I suppose they were called, and homosexuals. So much as Mr. Sam George will try and trivialize that, 17 million people died because someone thought they were doing God's work. Someone thought 17 million people got murdered. So you commit murder in the name of God and claim you're doing God's work. It doesn't make any sense to me. And we have embraced many so-called alien cultures, including Christianity. And when you go to our courts, you see our judges in those ridiculous looking wigs. And then most of us in the hot sunshine in Ghana put on a three-piece suit to go to work, so we look gentlemanly or ladylike. And so when we talk about alien culture being imported into Ghanaian culture, we have to be very careful, because where do we draw the line? And if any of us on this panel, while we're talking about religion, if any of us on this panel can confidently claim that we are without sin, then I propose that person should cast the first stone. Now, coming to the legislation, Section 104 of the Criminal Offences Act of 1960, which Honorable Sam George spoke at length about, is also a colonial law, as I said before, because the British actually passed that law in response to what they found in Africa when they arrived, interestingly enough. And if you doubt me, do your research. And this law defines unnatural carnal knowledge as sexual intercourse with a person in an unnatural manner or with an animal. So apart from homosexuality and lesbianism, how else may we define unnatural carnal knowledge? If you're a heterosexual couple, and I'm asking this of Honorable Sam George, if you're a heterosexual couple, for instance, and with all due respect to the sensibilities of everybody watching and listening, you both, the couple, enjoy carnal knowledge, anal sex, I'm sorry to say. Would you be considered criminals? Because of course, by his definition, that is unnatural carnal knowledge. Or is it the case that by virtue of being heterosexual, it is no longer unnatural carnal knowledge? What about adventurous couples who may want to invite a third individual into their sexual experience, bearing in mind that their right to enjoy sexual experiences how they want within the confines of their home is their right? If they choose to invite a third individual, knowing that in a three-way interaction, two of the persons within that interaction would have to be necessarily of the same sex, would that heterosexual couple become criminals as a result for promoting, for engaging in, and for being an ally? And then what about unmarried ladies who may not want to engage with humans, but decide that, these days we live in an age where if you are aware as I am, there may be some toys that individuals may choose to use. Would we criminalize that individual for using the toy because for their sexual pleasure, because it's a natural carnal knowledge? And these are the arguments that we need to look at very carefully when we begin to expand criminality. Honorable Sam George has said that homosexuality is already a criminal offense. Yes, it is, by virtue of the 1960s Act. But like I said, this was brought in by the British in response to what they thought they found on the continent when they arrived. And I believe that the law must change, but not in the way that Honorable Sam George is proposing. I, as a traditional ruler, has to look at humanity in its human form. And I have to ask my conscience, am I to say, by virtue of what the masses are shouting, by virtue of the frenzy that has been whipped up, and the calls for criminalization of a person, I must also, to be popular, jump on that bandwagon and want people to be criminalized and made criminals simply because they choose a way to the way they want to enjoy sexual pleasure. So the letter and the spirit of the proposed bill seeks to deliberately obliterate the line between conduct that causes harm. And Honorable Sam George demonstrated that when he equated armed robbery to homosexuality. And conduct that causes harm, such as armed robbery and sexual abuse, and then human choice. He's seeking to remove the lines between the two. So as far as Honorable Sam George and his supporters are concerned, if you're homosexual, you're automatically someone who will cause harm to another person. And he's smart enough to know that that's not true. The bill deliberately equates choice with abuse and criminal behavior. And I propose that a heterosexual is equally as capable of sexually molesting children or even adults as a person identifying as LGBTQ. If a gay person or an LGBTQ person goes to molest a child, that person has caused harm to another person, and their actions are subject to the law. They have caused harm. But the fact of being gay or LGBTQ does not automatically make them a criminal or someone who would cause harm to somebody. We have plenty of evidence in Ghana where heterosexuals are abusing little kids. We only have to look in our classrooms. I can give you personal examples of little kids that have been molested by heterosexual adults who are men. And so when you begin to equate a person's choice to what is tantamount to criminal behavior and abuse of another person and harm to another person, your argument lacks merit and intelligence. And the protection of children must be against bad actions and not a person's consenting choice. And by prohibiting anyone who identifies as such from being allowed to even adopt children under the guise of protecting children within section 17 and 18 of the proposed bill, you automatically assume that the child may be harmed if adopted by same-sex couples. And for me, that's unfortunate. If this bill was about defending society against bad people who harm or abuse children or adults, I will be the first person in line signing on the dotted line for it, because I have a responsibility. And as the chairman said, I am a strong advocate for women's rights and for children's rights. So I will be the first person supporting the bill wholeheartedly. But it isn't. It isn't. It's using dubious arguments to target people who may otherwise be good citizens of our nation, going on about their business, and anyone who would plead for proper consideration may be classed as an ally or an advocate and criminalized under the proposed bill, myself included. The very fact that I'm speaking as a traditional ruler and saying, let's look at this from a human rights perspective, let's look at this from a human perspective, makes me automatically a potential criminal under the proposed bill, because I become an advocate by Honorable Sam George's definition, or by the definition of anyone who chooses to infer from my words that I'm supporting LGBTQ rights. And so we need to be careful. If we are not careful, sooner or later, what heterosexuals do, when you see someone beating and Honorable Sam George and his supporters may argue that the bill also confers protection on people who identify as such. But if you see someone, and being abused or being beaten up for identifying as gay or lesbian or LGBTQ, and you try to speak for them, if someone is minded to, they may interpret your speech for them as being a proponent of LGBTQ, and they may report you as being an ally, and they may report you as being a supporter, and you may find yourself a criminal. Secondly, as heterosexuals, if you happen to have a very nosy neighbor who decided to look through your window and find you engaging in something that he or she has an aversion to, and determines that that thing is so abhorrent to them that they're going to report you to the authorities as engaging in unnatural carnal knowledge, be careful. What you wish for, you might just get, and you may become a criminal. So when we engage in this debate, let's look at it not from a perspective of populism and dubious arguments, but from the perspective of humanity, In my culture as a Ga, we have a saying that says, Ablekuma abakumawo. That is the concept of hospitality within the Ghanaian culture that I have come to understand. And while you may not like someone's way of life, you have a right not to engage with them, but you don't have a right to criminalize them and incite others to target them. Having said all this, I want to address the LGBTQ community also. Now, when you go into advocacy in a person's country, what you need to be aware of is to be aware of the sensibilities of that country. Ghana may be taking its time to engage with certain lifestyles or certain, matters which maybe have become common in other nations. When you come in, be sensitive to that. Take your time and allow the people to think through, to understand before engaging. When you go into someone's culture and you go in gung-ho and you want to insist that the person accept your point of view, what it creates is the very thing you want to avoid, which is resentment. And so I plead on with my brothers and sisters within the LGBTQ community to also bear that in mind and be sensitive. Ghanaians are not bad people. Ghanaians are not mad people. Ghanaians are hospitable people. But maybe we don't have the level of understanding that others have. So give us time to be able to arrive at the point where we would look at this from my perspective, which is the human and the holistic perspective. And thank you very much.